Hey guys, in this video I will show you my favorite step-by-step method for painting large models like dreadnoughts or infinity tanks. It's only 4 steps and it balances speed and quality, so you get really good looking models in the end without spending half your life doing it. I have just finished these 2 tag models from Infinity for a little diorama, and since I had to paint 4 models and the base, I didn't want to spend a ton of time painting each individual figure. So I used the method that in my experience gets me the best possible result in a reasonable amount of hours, and now I'm going to show you 2 so you can also paint your dreadnoughts or tags fast but pretty. Alright, let's jump right in with step 1, which is base coating the main colors. And this seems pretty straightforward, but it's actually the thing that will determine how your mini will look more than anything that comes after. First of all, you need to decide what your main colors actually are, so basically the ones that will cover the biggest real estate on the model. In my case, I wanted to mostly follow the official color scheme, so the main colors are going to be the olive green and the tan on both figures, plus the orange on the Scarface, which is the dude with the battle axe, and the other one is called Anakonda, just so you know. Okay, now I know the main colors, so at this point I need to select 3 or 4 paints that I will be using to paint that color, and that's usually the darker base coat and 2 or 3 highlights. For example, for the olive green armor panels, I will be using these 4 colors. I tend to use 4 colors for the most important tone, in this case the green, but for the less important elements you can also get away with using 3 or sometimes even 2, as you will see later. When I have the paint selected, I take the darkest one and I use it to cover the surface with multiple coats using a large brush. And I can't emphasize how important it is to get full coverage in this first step. If you don't reach full opacity, the paint will look patchy, dark and desaturated, and no matter what you do later on, it won't look good. So put in the time, paint 3-4 layers until the black is absolutely not visible underneath, and don't worry if the first 1 or 2 coats look like hot garbage. It's completely normal, you just have to paint more layers. The important thing is to let the layer dry, even if it looks terrible. Just leave it alone, paint something else and come back a little later to add 1 more on top of it. After the 3rd layer it will start looking decent, and after the 4th one it should look perfect. If it doesn't, add a 5th one. Alright, so at this point you should have 2 or 3 colors on your mini depending on the color scheme you are going for, but notice that I haven't painted any of the less important elements and the metals. And this is important, I leave those black for now for a reason, we will get back to them later. So step 1 is done, let's move on to step 2, and this one will require an airbrush, and I know that a lot of you guys don't like using one, but hear me out. These days you can get a tiny compressor and an entry-level airbrush like this starter set from GAAHLERI for the equivalent of the price of 2 dreadnoughts or 2 tag models. And I have used this starter kit to do all the airbrush work, not just on the tags but on the whole diorama, so it's definitely good enough for this kind of job. It's cheap, it's small, it's silent, and it allows you to do so many cool things, so if you like to paint and you paint a lot, then having at least an entry-level set like this is basically a must, the way I see it at least. Alright, that is my usual little rant about airbrushes, let's move on. So now it is time for those highlight colors we selected in the beginning, starting with the darker one. I dilute these with some airbrush thinner about 50-50 so it comes out smoothly, but not so much that it starts running on the surface. I want this to cover. And by the way, if you are worried that you would hit something that you are not supposed to, you can use some masking putty or masking tape to protect the other colors. I didn't use a mask here because the tags are fairly big and I wasn't worried about hitting the black parts too much. I only had to avoid the tan and the orange elements, which was fairly easy. And the goal in this step is to establish a transition from a darker to a lighter color on every panel. So I usually spray the upper part of an element covering about 70-80% of the surface and leave the rest in the original darker color. To make a transition, I spray only a couple of thin layers first and then I spray some more and thicker layers on a smaller surface. This way there is a transition area where the original color can still be seen under the new paint, but in the middle of the highlight everything is fully covered. A little trick that you can do is to make bigger highlights on the top half of the models, covering more surface there. This creates contrast between the top and the bottom halves and focuses the attention more on the chest and the head, which is exactly what we want. When I'm done with all the panels, I switch to the even lighter color and I do the same thing but now on a smaller surface inside the previous highlights. At this point I try not to hit the original darker color at all. The final goal is to have a transition on all the elements from the dark base color in the shadows to the medium bright colors in the middle and the lightest tone on the top in the highlights. For the most important color, which is the olive green on these guys, I tend to add a final even brighter highlight. In this case I use the yellowish green color to really increase the brilliance of the highlights. But on some less important elements you can get away with less colors as well. For example, on the orange panels I only use the single tone for now. And on some of the green panels of the Scarface that were mostly on the lower body and were supposed to be a slightly different tone, I also only used a single color to establish a transition. When I'm done with the highlights, I still want to do two small but important things while I still have the airbrush out. First, I load a little reddish-brown glaze into the airbrush by diluting this paint quite a bit to something like 20% paint and 80% thinner. And I spray this from below at an angle onto every panel, green, tan or orange, it doesn't matter. I don't want to completely cover anything with this, I just want to add a hint of red and darken things down just a tiny bit. Red happens to be a great shadow tone for all three of those colors, plus I planned a reddish desert environment for the base, so this color would make them fit into that. Adding some shading like this is a great idea for almost any model. It gives them more depth and creates more visual interest, and a red or purple shadow color works on almost any base coat, so you can't really go wrong with it. Finally, before I put away the airbrush, I use it to spray a couple of thin layers of gloss varnish over everything. This protects my thin airbrush layers from anything that I will do in the future, and it will also help me with the next step by making things nice and slippery. And that brings me to step 3, and just by seeing the gloss varnish, some of you might guess what I will do next. But before that, I had to clean up a little bit. I oversprayed and painted over the black elements a little too much, so this is a good opportunity to clean all that up by painting everything black again. You don't necessarily need to do this, you can just jump immediately to the next steps, but I find that the end result will be cleaner and neater like this, plus it gives me a better idea of how everything I have done so far looks without the mess around it. But with that done, it's time to mix a nice oil wash because step 3 is washing the whole model. For this, I added 3 parts black and 1 part red oil paint and mixed them together with a lot of mineral spirit. The end result is a slightly reddish black and very liquid wash, which is only slightly thicker than water. This can be done with pure black as well, by the way, you don't strictly need the red in there, but I wanted to sneak in a little color which also fits the reddish atmosphere I was going for. When the wash is done, I drench the entire model in it using a big old brush that I don't really care about too much anymore. Just make sure that the wash gets into every little nook and cranny and into all the deeper parts of the model. By the way, the reason we need this step is because we saved a lot of time doing the highlights with the airbrush, but in return we brightened up all the deeper parts of the model since the airbrush gets the paint into everything, even the places we want to keep dark. And this is probably the easiest and fastest way to fix that and to get back the definition and the contrast we lost. Could I use a normal acrylic wash here? No, I can't because that would stain the panels and ruin all the work I have done with the airbrush, whereas, as you will see in a second, the oil wash can be easily wiped away from the panels. Once I covered everything and made 2 very dirty boys, I left the oil paint sit for 20-30 minutes. Then, while it was still quite wet, I wiped it away from the larger surfaces, first with a clean brush and then with some makeup applicator sticks. I try to clean only the larger surfaces but leave it around the rivets, inside the deeper areas and all the little nooks and crannies of the armor. And whenever I felt that I removed too much, I reapplied some and then wiped away a little again. It is fine if it's not perfect. If I leave out some recesses now, I will be able to simply use some diluted black paint to correct that later. But the side effect of this oil step is that it also fixes the too smooth and dusty airbrush look. Everything looks way more saturated and slightly wetter than realistic after this dries. And speaking of drying, oil paints dry very slowly, so once you are happy with how it looks, it's better to leave it to dry at least overnight. When you start painting the next day, it should be mostly good, but you can still wipe away some leftover stains with a damp brush. Okay, now before we move on to the final step, we kinda have to jump back a little to the first one, because we left quite a few things without a base coat. So now it is time to paint in all those other smaller but still quite important things. In my case, I still had to base coat the purple and the red decorations, the bags and the pouches, the metals and the white emblems. The reason I am doing these now is because these were too small to paint with an airbrush and I didn't want to have to repaint them in case I stained them during the airbrushing phase. But once all the colors are in place, it's time for step 4, which is to highlight everything by brush. And since we have already taken care of most of the big volumetric highlights on the panels with the airbrush, this basically means 2 things: painting a lot of edge highlights and adding little scratches and marks on the larger panels to make them more interesting. The process usually goes like this. I start to highlight an element by using not the base coat, but the first color I use through the airbrush for that element. I use this to paint every single edge and add small scratches coming in from the sides of the panel, plus some little random dots and marks with the tip of the brush in some random places on the element. Then I switch to the next even brighter color in the sequence and I repeat this, but now I try to make the edge highlights thinner and only paint the edges facing the light. Plus I reinforce the little scratches and marks by painting even thinner marks in their middle with this color without fully covering the previous one. If I used an even brighter color, like the interior yellow on the green panels, I use this to paint only the most prominent edges at this point, as thin as I could make them. Then I move on to painting the next color, but now with its matching highlights. For example, on the orange panels, I used volcanic yellow and deep yellow for the highlights, but on the purple decorations, I used laser magenta and intense pink. This is definitely the most labor-intensive part of the paint job, going through every color and adding highlights on every one of them, but this adds a ton of definition and contrast to the model, so it's absolutely worth it. But there is only so much I can show you in a short YouTube video, so if you want to see much more painting footage and all the steps I did to paint this diorama, all the paints I used, how I painted the base and the pilots, basically everything, then check my Patreon where I will be posting the PDF guides and the real-time painting footage. Becoming a Patreon member gives you access to my Discord as well, where you can chat with me and other viewers. There are more and more people there, so come and join us. And after completing all the 4 steps and adding these guys to the diorama base I built and painted, the end result looks like this. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and maybe even learned something that you can use for your own projects. If that is the case, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and maybe dropped a comment under it as well. It really helps with the algorithm showing it to other people. And before I sign off, I wanted to give a shout out to all my Patreon members for supporting the channel. They are the ones that make what I do possible, and that is especially true for the ones in the captain level. Thank you guys, see you in the next one.